This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture.
Welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. Amanda Kramer and I are very excited to kick off a new series, How to Build and Fuel a Healthy, Impactful Company Culture. This is a topic that Amanda and I have talked about offline for quite some time. We really enjoy putting these episodes together, meeting some of the really special guests we have. But today we're going to kick off a brand new series focused on what we believe is one of the most important and most often looked drivers of business success, company culture. So whether you're leading a small startup or a growing enterprise, we believe culture shapes how your people show up, how your business performs, and ultimately the kind of impact you can make. So welcome, Amanda.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And I think this series is going to be really cool because we've often talked about we should probably write a book, or we could take all the episodes we've done together and put in some type of guide to people who are, whether they're starting out building a culture, or they want to revise the culture that they have, or they feel like it's too far gone. It never is. You still have an opportunity to take a step back. And so this is going to be the series that we're working on over the next several episode releases is going to be like a practical kind of step-by-step conversation about how to build and fuel, as you said, which I love, a really healthy, relevant, impactful culture, no matter your size. You'll hear me say on this podcast is it doesn't matter if you're 3 people or you're 300 or you're 3,000. It really doesn't matter. Culture really comes down to the community that you're building and really what your journey looks like as a leader. So I'm excited to dig into this. And over the course of these next episodes, we're going to involve experts and practitioners and guests that are really special to us that we've met along our journey together. And we're going to dig into all kinds of questions. So Tim, maybe you can talk about one that I know you want to definitely cover when we talk about the step-by-step guide of questions we'll be addressing in these upcoming episodes.
Yeah. So I think some of what we're going to look at is, how do you develop a mission and a purpose, and more importantly, even values that are authentic, not just words on a wall. There was a lot of books written in the 90s and 2000s about, you got to have a mission statement and a purpose statement and values. And a lot of companies did that, put them on a wall. Nobody knew what they meant, or
you just walk by them every day.
Even knew what they were. And I think specifically, I know we'll dive into the topic of alignment of values in a business, because I think that is one of the key drivers to a healthy culture. I love to measure things, and, I'm big on metrics. And so for those people that are minded like that, we're going to talk about what does it look like to measure culture with the same rigor you might measure your financials or the growth of your business. So that's scorecards, accountability. And again, some of that's going to be kind of hard data. And quite frankly, some of that's going to be anecdotal, which is always, the soft stuff sometimes is the hard stuff.
You've always said to me, because a lot of what I do in our daily life is intangible when it comes to a scorecard. So we're going to really talk about what it means to kind of make that tangible, make a scorecard item, because all of us have something we're working towards and measuring. Really what that looks like to say, okay, we can measure the impact of our culture by looking at one or two things that might seem a little more abstract, but you can put a number to paper. It's just how do you want that to show up in your organization? So we're going to give you a tool as to how to do that.
Yeah, and I've come to appreciate you need both sides of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the tangible and intangible. Another topic we've touched on in this podcast and have a lot of passion around is how do you develop the next generation of leaders? There's a generational shift taking place in the workforce. There are more people now exiting the workforce. I just saw this yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. Somewhat alarming trend. There are more people exiting the workforce just from a retirement, aging out perspective than there are coming in. Which presents some interesting challenges for businesses, in the next 10 to 30 years. So how do you develop that next generation of leaders to ensure the culture you have is carried forward and or adapts to, the environment you're in? And then obviously teams are an important part of all businesses. And again, as you look at the next generation of leaders, the next generation of the workforce, they are much more apt to work in a team environment than they are, whether they're financial advisors or in a business setting. Teams tend to perform at a higher level are a little bit more apt to attract talent. But, we're going to look at how to make those high performing teams tick and operate effectively and sustain that performance over time. So those are a few of the themes we're going to touch on in this series.
And as I said, we've had some really impactful guests over our tenure together, and we have some new voices and faces that we want to include as part of this how-to guide. And so that's what you can expect from us over the next several episode releases. And whether you are starting out, like I said, or you're looking to refine, or you're like, I just need to completely start all over, there's going to be something in this series for you. And we're really excited to dive in. And we can't wait to bring you the tools and the stories and the strategies that we really feel can help you and your team thrive as you're looking to build a really resilient, impactful culture. So now that we kind of set up what these next several episodes are going to be, I think a really great place for us to start is to talk about what some of those foundational truths are about why culture matters so deeply, not only today, but as Tim said, generational shift as business progresses forward. There's always going to be seasons when it comes to how you're building your culture. So really want to talk about what that looks like and how we're going to collectively come together and support that conversation. So I came across this stat the other day, and it was basically that like 85% of people report loneliness. And that was just like, I can't even, right? So Tim, when you hear that, what does that mean for you? What's your reaction when you hear that 85% of people report experience loneliness? And that's across the board, professionally, personally.
Yeah, it's kind of honestly staggering and depressing at the same time. I mean, I wonder what it says about the environment we're in and the effect of, it's funny, we've talked about this topic before, how technology is supposedly connecting people, but it seems like perhaps with that statistic, it's isolating people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a really sobering, depressing, kind of downer of a stat. At the same time, it speaks to the potential upside of creating an environment. People, as we've talked about, and over the years, people spend the vast majority of their day at work or in a working environment. So there's a lot of opportunity to address that topic by creating some sense of community and some sense of engaging people out of their shells and out of that loneliness into something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, well, it's a sense of belonging, a sense of inclusion. And I think that really here's the point, right? Like if we're building environments, again, we approach in our daily lives, our work lives, I should say, we approach kind of meeting the person where they are, personally, professionally, really coming to all the places in which, really make us human. And I think that if people are building environments where people feel isolated, again, you reference technology. We've had a lot of conversation about that, but how are you using technology? If you have people who are feeling isolated, disconnected, or even unseen, then it doesn't really matter what your business strategy looks like. You're kind of missing that human element. And that's one thing that you and I have focused heavily on in building out what our work culture is the fact that we are a community of humans and we're going to have good days and bad days, and we're going to meet that person where they are professionally and personally. And so this is kind of like that first check-in for those that are listening along with us. Like, are you creating a place where people feel connected? Are they experiencing loneliness? And I'm going to say specifically as part of their work environment. And is there something that you have observed that you can note down? Again, this is just your first check-in. We're going to continue over these next several episodes to kind of give you more tools and resources and dig deeper into this. But if you're listening right now, kind of take that first gut check. Are you creating a place where people feel connected? Or have you seen a shift towards isolation or disconnection? So that's number one. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to say, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, that's right. How do you measure that?
And I would say first that the Gallup organization did a study a few years ago that said if a person has a friend at work, it dramatically reduces turnover. So I think one way to measure this topic is, do you have a higher than average turnover in your industry? Obviously, some industries are just prone to turnover, but in a professional setting, less likely the case. Now, some people think turnover is a result of money. When you look at studies, that's further down the list. a sense of purpose or a lack of sense of purpose, a sense of connection or a lack of sense of connection. And this topic of loneliness falls into that, drives better retention. So that may be one way to measure it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and kind of going down the measurement component of things, oftentimes in business, we talk about ROI. The tangible and intangible ROI, I think, is that next kind of piece that we want to dig a little bit deeper into. And we often hear return on investment, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about culture, I really look at it as it's return on impact, because culture is all about people. So there is going to be that ability for us to measure something, right? We do need to have an accountability to how was our culture doing overall. But there is an element to pull in that more impact around the community that you're continuing to build. I don't know how that resonates with you, but that's how I look at ROI when we talk about culture specifically in an organization.
Yeah. And maybe you can tease out a little bit, what are some of the impact items? Because again, as we talked about earlier, I'm very in ROI on the investment side minded.
Right.
But when you think impact, what are some of the measurable outcomes of that?
Yeah, well, and I think to set that up even a little bit further is that we're not building a culture with human doings. So people that come in and they're part of a widget and they like do their thing and they just leave, and
They're not AI chatbots.
they're not AI chats, right? We're definitely building cultures with human beings. And that goes back to what I said a little bit earlier, is like meeting that person where they are and shifting that thought process as a leader to how you're approaching each individual. Because oftentimes it really just takes a simple, and you do this really well, so I'm going to highlight you. You do this really well. Like, even if you're engaging with an individual, you use their name. Like, if you're having a longer discussion with them, you will insert their name. That makes them feel, going back to what we talked about earlier, that they're seen and that they're heard and that their opinion or what they're sharing with you, no matter if it's a casual conversation, on the way back from the break room, or if you're in a business discussion, that makes them feel as though they're valued for what they're sharing. And that's a small way to increase the likelihood that they're feeling connected. And that's, at the end of it, they feel connected to the organization as a whole. They feel as though they're being seen as a person. And then they have the ability to kind of to flex and to say, I'm having a really good day. I'm having a really bad day. This is where I am. And for that not to be used against them.
Yeah.
And that is really important. I oftentimes, people will joke and say that I personally should have like a couch in my office, because I do end up getting like air quotes therapy. People will come in and kind of dump their bucket. And that's great. Right. They need a safe place to be able to do that and to be able to understand that that's not going to go anywhere other than a thematic discussion if it's coming up multiple times, to come back to the greater leadership of said organization and say, this is what we're hearing from a feedback. This group of individuals is really struggling with. It might be communication with their immediate leader, or I like to say their person, their immediate leader, their manager. How are we supporting them in that conversation? What tool are we providing them so they can have a more effective dialogue, so they feel seen and heard and understood for what their point of view is? So those are just a couple of things that I think about when we talk about return on impact. It's more about, and you gave that example, that if somebody has a friend at work, they're less likely to exit or to have a negative association. Something else that I really have carried along, and this came from the Purpose Summit, which many of our guests upcoming we've met either through the past Purpose Summits that we've been to, or they were speakers that we really wanted to see and we both couldn't get to all the sessions. But Dr. Beth Kaplan shared, and she was talking on the main stage, and she was discussing the fact that an individual will carry their past manager experience, good or bad, with them for up to 15 years.
Wow.
That is a long time. And I kind of sat with that for a minute, because I was like, that is impact in a way that if you are that next receiving manager or leader of that individual, you kind of need to know what that person's past experience is, because it's going to shape how they initially engage with you and how they initially connect with the organization. And you can have a better relationship, a more trusting environment if you can just have that open dialogue from the beginning. So share with me what your past manager experience has been.
Sure.
You don't need to say anything else, right? Let them, share that with you. And then you can deduce how you then want to build that relationship with that person. Because if they had a negative or a bad experience, they will continue to carry that with them. If they've had a really positive one, they will carry that with them. And so then you get to be that next positive experience. And that's a return on impact for not only the business growth, but also the future of that individual. And we're really big into pouring into people. And that's just another way to pour into them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as you were telling that story, in essence. I was with one of our advisors yesterday in their 70s. I haven't had a lot of interaction with him over the years, but as we were finishing up, he said, I've never met anybody, and I'm not saying this to brag about myself, just to kind of highlight your point. He said, I've never met anybody quite like you in your role. And I said, well, tell me about that. He said, well, these are the types of people I've worked for before, and they've all kind of been self-serving and not have my best interest at heart. And he said, I just get you genuinely care about my success and what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I feel confident you're going to help me get there. And I said, yeah, no, that's how we operate as an organization. But it strikes me as I had that, I had another meeting later in the day with someone that did not have the openly discussed bad experiences. And I'm not sure in my interaction with that person, that's a high hurdle to overcome if you're the next leader.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, one encounter, but it was like, people come into the conversation with that next leader as if that next leader is going to be as same as the bad leader I had before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's maybe a whole separate episode.
It probably is. I know that I've shared on a past episode, I don't remember which one, I've talked about it a lot, but I'm a firm believer that you only get so many greats, right? Mm-hmm. Like you need both the not so great, and you don't need negative, but you need the not so great and the great to help you round out your perspective on how you want to show up as a leader. Like you need both examples for you to, it doesn't mean that you have to emulate, but you need both examples for you to come to that realization of who you are and how you want to show up as a leader. And ultimately, people will gravitate towards the type of leader they want to be themselves. They're looking for something in you as an individual. And I think that really starts with the purpose that you state as a leader, and that day in and day out, you are consistent with that. In the really great moments and in the not so good moments, you show up the same, which that's to your point, that advisor you were talking to, you always show up the same. Yeah. And that is very rare, especially in our industry. We've had that conversation before, but that's really rare that you get Tim on Monday at 9 a.m., you get the same Tim on Friday at 4:52, right? Like, you know that you're going to be consistent in how you care for people and how you show up. And I think that leans a lot into the difference you're able to make because you do lead with purpose.
Let's expand on that because I think you're touching on something. I am very clear in my purpose as a leader. And I think as this series unfolds, if you are a leader, that is not clear on your purpose, I would say stop and get clear on your purpose. And there's lots of different tools and resources to do that. Once you're clear on your purpose, though, you need to walk it, not just talk it. And you need to be consistent in showing up. And you do need to share it. Again, I think you do need to talk about it, but you need to, more importantly, show up with that consistently. And so let's kind of dive into that. I mean, our purpose obviously impacts other people tremendously, as does compassion. And there are two topics I think we can touch on here. Trust is a huge issue in the business space today. I remember years ago, one of our past guests, who's a friend of mine, who is new to the business world, coming out of a different background, said, why is everybody in business not so trustworthy? And I said, that's a great question. Tell me more. What do you mean? And he explained some situations. And I think you shared with me recently, 61% of people do not believe their leaders represent or they misrepresent the truth. And that's a pretty high number. That's more than 50%. So, as you think about that, Tell me a little bit more about your sense of how purpose and compassion kind of rolls into this topic.
Well, I definitely think that compassion is kind of the antidote to what you just said, right? That 61% of people believe that their leaders
Yeah.
misrepresent the truth. And that goes back to the comment I said about the past manager or a leader experience that individual have. If they had a not so great one where somebody wasn't consistent and did not always share the truth or wasn't as transparent as they needed to be, that person is carrying that with them for, like I said, up to 15 years. That's a long time in your professional career. And when we think about being compassionate, and this goes back right to kind of celebrating and also sitting in all the things that make us human, we have different experiences that have shaped who we are individually. We have a childhood story, you have an origin story, you have all of those things that are coming into play, that internal dialogue that you're constantly having in every interaction. And I think that one of the easiest things to do is that if you kind of take empathy and then you put action around it, that is what's equaling compassion in the workplace. And when we were sitting at the Purpose Summit this past year, I was sitting in a session and I heard this and I was like, okay, I mean, I feel like we do this very well and I can give a couple of examples, but it only takes 40 seconds. So that's shorter than the time it takes you to brew a coffee or to, walk from point A to point B. It only takes 40 seconds of compassion to reduce someone's anxiety. So it's 40 seconds, like not that long of a period of time. And it kind of reminds me of a day, and oftentimes, and I'm, again, not doting on myself either, but it's a spidey sense you kind of have when somebody either, needs a high five, needs a hug, needs to come in your office and close the door, right? They need to spill their bucket. And so knowing that about the individuals that you're, building your community with and giving space for that, not always having your calendar so booked that you don't have 40 seconds to go and lend a sense of compassion is really important. And I just remember a scenario, you had not told me that you were going through a hard day at all. You always show up really well, but I just knew, right? And I happened to run into you on the main lobby door to our office. I just gave you a hug. I didn't tell you why. It was just a hug, right? And that's our relationship. Not everybody's going to be comfortable giving a hug. I realize that. But it was 40 seconds. I didn't have to say anything, right? And we were able, and you looked at me and you were like, I really needed that today, right? So sometimes you don't even have to ask or know what that person is going through to be able to come to them and reduce that sense of anxiety and just be a human in that moment. And I think that's a really practical way for leaders in general to kind of continue this momentum of just human generosity, is kind of being that next leadership currency. So if you are able to lead with purpose as a leader, and you know that it's really about how you show up and how much you care, and ultimately how you show that you care, everybody, and it's funny because we'll talk about this a lot, but everybody wants to receive recognition and praise and that kind of pouring into them in a different way. So that can be hard as a leader to know, okay, Amanda needs 1, 2, and 3. Ashley needs X, Y, and Z. This person needs this. This person needs this. But taking that 40 seconds of a small act of compassion really leads itself to that trust component that we keep talking about.
I think that, the other side of that is sometimes compassion is being willing to have a hard conversation.
Practicing radical candor.
Yeah, but in a caring way.
Yep.
And before you and I recorded this, I shared some stuff that could have been a good session by itself, our chat. But
I feel like we always should hit record when we talk. Just see what comes out.
It comes out. But, I mean, there was an example I shared with you of I was confronted on something in a caring way by my business partner. And it was a bit jarring in the moment, but the compassion was, hey, you're not showing up as I'm accustomed to what's going on. And I was vaguely aware of that, but not wanting to pay much attention to it. And that, in that moment, just that brief encounter in my office was like, wow, yeah, no, there's something here I need to pay attention to. And it had a cascading effect of very positive insights and behavior changes just from that one I would call compassionate, but very direct conversation that I am sure maybe not for her, be uncomfortable, but for me in the moment and again, I was allowing myself to be vulnerable based on our relationship, but I was like, whoa, okay, wow, that's not what I thought you were going to come in here and hit me with, but okay, let's talk. So times leans into the hard stuff too.
It does. And for those that are not familiar with Radical Candor and Kim Scott, this is a plug. You need to go and listen to her TED Talk on Radical Candor, because the whole purpose of that, right, is that being radically candid means that you care so deeply about an individual and their success and their peace that you are willing to challenge them directly and have that conversation. And so I think that's a really great example of continuing to put that into practice. And that is being compassionate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
So I'm a leader. I'm listening to this interesting stuff. How do I begin to evaluate my culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it comes down to 3 areas of focus. One is like community building. So do people feel part of something bigger? Do they feel connected to what this greater purpose might be? 2 would be active listening. So we're really not just like listening to the words that somebody is saying, but we are listening to
what we're going to say next.
Exactly. Or
we're interrupting them like I am in you.
That's totally fine. But it's one of those things where I'm not listening to Tim to craft a response. I'm listening actually for what he's not saying most often. And I'm listening to be able to understand. So I'm being curious. I'm asking curiosity questions. So then I am able to then put that into some type of action based on that particular person, where they are personally and professionally. And then the third thing from a focus area would be inclusion. So does every person if you're a 3-person team, 30, whatever the number is, does every person have a mechanism and an ability and a safe space to be seen, heard, and valued? So like those are the 3 things that I would like take pause and say, okay, am I building a community? Do people feel like they're part of something bigger? Yes or no?
Yep.
Am I actually listening for what they're saying and not saying, but not so much to just respond, but to understand where they're coming from and then to be able to act upon it? Yes or no? And then inclusion. Do I see that people feel heard, seen, and valued? Yes or no? Like, I think if you can start there and answer those 3 questions, then you have a really great foundation for what you may or may not need to do to either reinvigorate your culture, pause and shift, or just enhance what you already have.
So what if I'm an honest leader and it's no to any or all of those? What do I do?
You know what? And that's okay if it is a no. Honestly, I think that that's your starting place. So if you have 2 yeses and a no, pick the one that's the no.
Yep.
And culture really begins with awareness and small intentional choices, right? It's not this big grand gesture. Culture, if you want to think about it, like it's kind of like the Titanic. Like you're not going to be able to move it in a day. You might not even be able to move it in a week. Like you really have to be like intentional. And I know we use that word a lot, but really intentional and take small bite-sized pieces of how you want to attack whatever that question is that you had to answer no to. You do not need to rebuild everything overnight. You need to start with one consistent shift. Whatever that one thing is you're going to change, and if you do have a leadership team, you need to have that conversation. So every single person shows up the same with that one shift.
Yeah, that's where that alignment becomes critically important.
Yeah, and it's small daily choices, right? We all wake up every day. Like you were telling me before we started recording this one that you had a race. And did you want to get up like every fiber in your being at, whatever, 5 a.m.
on Saturday.
You're like, I don't want to do this.
They go run both the hills, 2,000
Exactly.
rate change.
Like your small daily choice was to not hit snooze and to get out of bed and to put your gear on and to go drive and go do that race, right? So, but you do that because you have a community that supports you and we want to know how your race went. Does not matter what place you come in. I always like to encourage that. We always want to know how your race went. We're always listening to, the stories of your races. And those are actually some of my favorite ones when you talk about all the Spartan pieces that you've done and how that's really leaned into your leadership style. And that ultimately, you as an individual, that's personally something that makes up who you are and how you show up. And we care, and that part of you matters to every conversation that we're having. And I think that that's the next piece from like a listener takeaway. Like if you are sitting here listening to this, it's small daily choices. If you had to answer no to one of those questions, what is that one intentional thing that you're going to do differently? How are you going to speak that into existence so people know that you're making this shift? It's not this like covert operation. Like you're saying, I know that we need to change X and we're going to do that. And this is what you can expect from me. If you don't see it, I need you to tell me. That's practicing radical candor. So I need you to tell me if you don't see that, because you matter and this organization matters, and we're going to work to get better, and we're going to do culture better, which I think is the really cool part of how this series is going to come together for everybody.
I'm really excited about the beginning of this series. We've talked about it for a while. It's good to get started. So again, over the next several episodes, as we mentioned, we're going to be bringing in guests who are experts in a lot of the topics we've talked about today, whether it's mission, values, purpose, leadership development, metrics, scorecard, building teams, just, some great stories of people that have built enduring cultures. So we'll be giving you some really practical tools to keep fueling a culture that lasts. So I'm really looking forward to this series.
Same. And we really hope that you stay with us on the journey, and we're going to build this playbook with you. So we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.